Hey everyone, this is Russ from RetroGameCore. So just the other day I did a video about a new firmware for the RG351P, and here I am again with yet another firmware, and this one is called ArkOS. And I wasn't planning on doing another firmware video anytime soon, but I got really excited about this one, and I think you're going to be excited about it too once I show you all the cool things that this can do. Now, to be honest, the whole firmware thing on the RG351P is getting kind of confusing, right? You have the original firmware and all these other new ones, so let's break it down real quick. So Ambernick created a new firmware from EmuElec, and what they did is they took this open source firmware and then they made a bunch of modifications on it, and then they built it into their device. Now, this isn't a true EmuElec system. A better way to describe it is just a modified version of EmuElec. And there's a lot of issues with this firmware. I've heard from several developers who have said that the code within this modified EmuElec is kind of buggy. So somebody actually took this modified version of EmuElec and then they ported it over and they forked it into their own firmware, which they're calling 351elec. And that was the last video I did. So somebody basically took this original firmware and they made all sorts of improvements on it, but kept it very fundamentally similar to the original packaging. Now, ArkOS is a little bit different from these other firmwares because it is actually built from the ground up separately from the modified EmuElec. Now, ArkOS got its name from the fact that it is another RK3326 operating system, and the RK3326 is the chipset that is within this device, as well as the other Odroid Go Advanced style devices. So let's talk about this firmware's features. So first of all, it is actually based off of Ubuntu 19.1. and it supports a 32-bit and 64-bit user space. What that means is you can use 32-bit and 64-bit apps, which gives you a much wider range of implementation with different emulators, which means that you have a lot more variety to choose from. Also, this has a ROMs partition in the disk that allows you to transfer files through Mac and PC using the exFAT protocol, which is very fast and very secure. And this device also has online operating system updates. So for example, you have this connected to a network, you're able to just go in and update the device itself, which I'll show you later in this video. In addition, it has full RetroArch implementation. And what I mean by that is the fact that you can do everything in RetroArch in this device. So for example, one of my favorite things to do is to update my cores online, right? Update my emulators to the most recent version of it. And this allows you to do that. And this is the only RG351P firmware that does allow that. So that's pretty awesome. And finally, there's a lot of little user interface things that are just really helpful. For example, they have a really nice screensaver in this firmware. And in addition to that too, they have background music you can add to your menus. And we'll do that later in the video. But overall, I'm really excited about some of these features on the operating system. So let me show you how to install it. So just like always, there will be a guide in the video description below, so just go down there and you'll actually find the link to this GitHub page and go down, scroll down till you find the Google Drive link, and then download the operating system from there. It's going to be about 2 gigabytes, so give yourself a few minutes. Alright, so once you've downloaded it, go ahead and unzip it and drag it over to your desktop or some other folder. So at this point, we're going to use Win32 Disk Imager to burn the image to an SD card. So go in here, click on that folder icon, find your image on your computer, and then make sure it's the right drive so that you have the SD card selected, and then you just hit the right button. And that's it. And it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to burn altogether, but once you're done with that, all you have to do is eject your SD card, and then we'll put it in our RG351P. Okay, so here we are back at the device, so go ahead and put the SD card in and then turn it on. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to expand your partitions to allow you to have as much space as possible to put all your game files on. So just let it go through all the menus, hit OK when it says to hit OK, and at some point you'll be done and it'll go into the actual operating system. So let's check it out. So ArkOS uses Emulation Station as its front end, the same way as EmuElec and 351elec, so it'll probably be a very familiar user interface for you. So you can actually go through here and see what's already on the SD card before we've added any ROMs. If you go into the ports section, you'll find that some freeware games are already ready to play. So for example, you can just boot up Cave Story and play it right then and there. Now, one nice thing is that he created all the hotkeys already, so all you have to do is hit select and start twice, and that'll exit out of any game. And that includes when you use a classic game like NES or Super Nintendo, things like that. You can also see here that Wolfenstein 3D, the shareware version of it, so the free version that we used to pass around back in the 90s, is also available here for use. Now, one thing I want to show you is the options menu, which is a little bit different than the other firmwares. So for example, you can change the display brightness right then and there, and you don't have to go through a bunch of menus to get to it, which is pretty cool. You can also change the themes pretty easily, and one nice thing about this operating system is that the themes have actually been tweaked to really stand out on this small screen. So somebody went through and already modified all of these themes, and several of them are different from the ones that you would see in EmuElec or 351Elec, which is pretty cool. So there are two versions of RetroArch on here. There's the 32-bit version that you're used to, as well as a new 64-bit version as well. So you can access those right from the menu. So this operating system also has its own options menu, and within this you can actually enable and disable remote services, or for example you can set up your network and your Wi-Fi information right then and there. You can check your IP address, as well as do online updates, which we'll get into here in a minute. Now that we have a little bit of an orientation with the operating system itself, let's go ahead and shut down and start adding our ROMs to the system itself. So all you want to do is turn off your system, take out your SD card, and put it back into your computer at this point. When you plug your SD card back into your PC, you actually have two windows pop up. The first is a boot window that you actually don't need, and the second one is going to be called Easy ROMs. And this is your ROMs folder. In here, you're going to put all your game files. Now, one thing to note is that the BIOS files are not included in this, so you're going to have to bring in your own BIOS files. But luckily, the developer already thought about all this. So if you actually just go back to their GitHub page, you will find a page that'll show every single system that's supported by this device, as well as which emulators it uses, where the ROM folder is, what file extensions it prefers, and on top of that, any BIOS files that are required as well. So you can get all the information you need right here on this page, and that'll allow you to put the right files in the right place with the right BIOS. And additionally, further down on the page, it'll show you all the different ports. So these are the games that have been ported over specifically for Emulation Station. So in here, you can see where to put your Doom files, or Pico-8 files, or Quake, any of these other files. It'll show you everything that you need to know for that. Additionally, they have a frequently asked questions page. So if you have any questions, they've actually mapped out a lot of the issues that people come up with, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so back to our games folder. All we have to do here is just drag and drop. So you just open up, say for example, your Game Boy folder, take your Game Boy games, drag them over, do the same thing with Game Boy Advance, and then just rinse and repeat. Okay, so I also want to show you how to install Pico-8 here. So all you actually do is go into the BIOS folder, and there will be a Pico-8 folder, and then you download the Raspberry Pi version of Pico-8, and you drag all those files over. And that's actually all you have to do. Okay, so let's get back onto our device and let's show you some other features. So first of all, let's connect to the internet. And the internet's a little bit different on this device than it is the others. You actually go into the options menu, select Wi-Fi, and then put in your information. From there, you can pull up network information, and you will see your IP address. And you're going to need to know that IP address for later when you actually log into the system using Wi-Fi FTP. Now, by default, remote services are disabled, so you have to actually go in and select Enable Remote Services every time, and that's really just a security feature to make sure that your device is safe and secure. Okay, so let's hop onto our PC now that we've enabled remote services and we know our IP address. So you type in your IP address here at the top under the host name, and then the username is Ark, A-R-K, and the password is Ark, A-R-K as well. And there you go, you're into the device now. So if you need to get into any configuration files or anything else like that, that's the way to do it. Okay, so back on this network screen, let's show you how to actually update the software itself. So go into the options menu, select Update, and then boot it up. And it'll ask you to press OK to proceed to say that you want to run the update script. And you can see here, it's just updating over the internet, just like your phone does or anything else. It's really awesome. One thing you may be noticing is that I do not have a Wi-Fi dongle attached to my device, and that's because I have an internal Wi-Fi chip. I have one of the early RG351Ps. But most likely, if you did not buy an RG351P in the first day or two that it was available, you don't have this feature. So you're going to need a Wi-Fi dongle. I'll include that in my guide below so you know which ones work. Okay, so the update is now complete. You can just go ahead and close out of this. We can now enjoy the most recent version of ArkOS. And this new update has a couple nice features like PlayStation 1 Rumble, things like that, and I expect that over the coming weeks we're going to get more and more features and updates into the system. Okay, so here we are with the new user interface, and here you can just go and scroll through your different systems, select games, things like that. So let's boot up a game now. Now, like I mentioned before, the hotkeys are already enabled, so all you have to do is press Select and X to get into the RetroArch menu. Okay, so when you first open up RetroArch, you might be surprised to see that it has a different user interface than what you're used to, and that's because this has a different menu driver enabled, and menu driver is just another word for theme within RetroArch, and it does all the same things that you're expecting in the other interface, and I'm going to change it back to the original interface just to make it a little easier on you. So you just have to go and back out to the main menu, and then select Settings, and then Drivers, and from there you just go down to Menu, and you can see it says RGUI. I'm going to change that back to XMB, and that's the original menu. So after you've selected that, go ahead and back out to the main menu, select Configuration File, and then Save Current Configuration. Now all you need to do is close out of RetroArch and then start it back up. Okay, and we're going to use the hotkey again, select an X, and here we are. We're back in our regular RetroArch interface. So it's up to you which interface you want to use. I'm going to go ahead and use this older one just because that's what I'm used to, but if you like that newer one, go for it. It's all going to be the same. All the inputs and everything are going to be the same. It just has a different look and feel to it. So one of my favorite features of this new RetroArch is the fact that it has full implementation. And what I mean by that is if you go into Online Updater, you can actually go in and you can update your installed cores, or you can download new cores. And this is all super cool to me because this is not available on any of the other firmwares for the RG351, which means that you can go in here and periodically update, for example, your NES or your Super Nintendo core because they have updates that are pushed out all the time. And this gives you the opportunity to have the most recent version of that emulator, which is really awesome to me. The fact that you can update this operating system over the internet, and you can also go into RetroArch and update those cores over the internet is really, really cool to me. That means that basically once you install this one time, you can continue to use this firmware without having to go and pull out your SD card and download new things or install new things like that. And I think that's really, really cool function for most people out there. Now, one of the things you're going to find when you open up the games is just like any other firmware, the graphics have not been optimized for this screen. So you're going to have to go in here and change your scaling and graphic configurations. Now, I'll leave a link to my screen configuration guide below, and that'll allow you to go in and change all of your parameters so that it works optimally for the RG351 screen. And even though I made that guide a couple weeks ago, all of the fundamental things still apply to this. For example, with the home consoles, I prefer to use RGA scaling, things like that. And I'll show you how to do all that in the screen configuration guide. Okay, so you can see here with Batman, I changed the RGA scaling back on, and then I also went and saved it. So now it's going to have nice, smooth NES pixels. One point I want to make is the fact that there are two RetroArchs, which means you have to change the settings twice because they use different configuration files. So for example, that last NES emulator was running on the 64-bit version of RetroArch, but you can see here when I start up Mario 64, the Nintendo 64 emulator is using the 32-bit version. So same thing here, I need to go into the settings, I need to change the menu driver back to the original menu driver, I need to save the configuration file, and then I need to back out. Along those same lines, any of the screen configuration changes that I need to make and everything else, I have to do that 2 times. Now that might sound like a pain in the butt, but honestly, you just do it 1 time and then you're done. And honestly, it's probably only like 30 minutes altogether of work where you have to go in and get all these configurations set up, but once you're done, you never have to worry about it again. Okay, so you can see here I'm running Mario 64 on the 32-bit version of RetroArch, and honestly this is the exact same as it plays in the other firmwares because it's using the same emulation cores. Here we are with PS1, and let me show you how to enable Rumble on this. So you just go through here in the quick menu and then just go to Options and then scroll down until you find Enable Vibration and make sure that's on. Next, you go down to Inputs and change your controls, go to Port 1 Controls and make sure it's set up for DualShock, and that's it. Okay, so let me show you how to play Pico-8. So all you have to do is go into the Ports menu and then start up Pico-8, and then from here just toggle over to Featured, and as long as you're connected to the internet, you hit that update button and it'll show all the featured games. You're basically browsing through, downloading and installing and playing any game through the internet, which is really, really awesome because there's thousands of cool indie games available on this console. And so this is one of my favorite features of the RG351P is that you're able to play the full version of Pico-8 and you can pull up these full games from the internet. It's kind of like an on-demand service, like a Netflix for games, which is really kind of cool to me. Okay, so let me show you other systems I don't show off very often. So here's ScummVM, which is a point-and-click PC adventure game engine, and this will allow you to play all sorts of games like the Monkey Island games and King's Quest and whatnot. So you just have to navigate over here, add games, and then you just go and navigate to the ScummVM folder and then include all of the different files that you need for that. And I have a ScummVM guide in my RG350 if you want to check it out, and I'll make a guide for this later on as well, but I just kind of want to demonstrate how well this works right now. So here I am loading up Curse of Monkey Island, adding it to my library, and then I'm going to start it up. And there we go, Curse of Monkey Island. Curse of Monkey Island was one of my favorite late 90s point-and-click adventure games on the PC, and so it's really cool that I'm able to have this in this 3.5-inch handheld device. It's just really awesome. Okay, so here's PSP. PSP performance is no better than it is on the other devices, but it's still, it feels pretty good, and in general, I've been fairly surprised with how well PSP has been working over the past couple weeks, and it's no different here on ArkOS. Now, it's not groundbreaking, this isn't going to play every game, but more and more games are becoming what I would consider playable. Dreamcast performance is still pretty good, and again, these are all running the same emulators and the same cores as you're expecting, so I don't expect it to play any better or worse as it does on the other operating systems. And in general, what I really like about ArkOS is the user interface, but I wanted to show you that at least none of these are broken. So speaking of broken, the DS emulator still kind of sucks. This drastic one is closed source, so it's very hard to be able to get in and make any changes to it. But I will tell you one thing that this developer did is they made it so you're actually able to use the menu, and when you press down, it actually shows you where you're at. And that is kind of a big leap for me because that was a pain in the butt to use in the other operating systems. So as expected, Game Boy Advance is just perfect on this device because it has the perfect aspect ratio. But on top of that, you can go into RetroArch and you can download it and install and then play with new shaders. So for example, I'm going to use the Game Boy Advance LCD grid shader that has color correction on it. And this will give you the original color kind of feel of the original Game Boy Advance, as well as the LCD kind of screen as well. So that really is a kind of nostalgic feel to it. But you can even go in there and change it. So for example, if you only want the LCD grid, you can go and change that to that specific shader, which will show you the grid without the color correction. And you'll see here when I go back to the game, it'll be a much brighter, more vivid experience. Yeah, so here you go. You can see how colorful Wario is in this picture. Now, arcade emulation on this device and on this firmware is just as good as it was before. So you can see here I'm playing MAME 2003 Plus, and I'm using Samurai Showdown 5 as my example, and it's playing just fine full speed. Alright, so let's get into the menu and talk a little bit more about some of the other options you have available to you. So in the main menu, you will find the option for different emulator settings. And within here, you can actually pick your system and then go through and pick which emulator you want to use. For example, the RetroArch 64-bit or the RetroArch 32-bit. And then you can pick whichever cores are available within each of those versions of RetroArch. So you can kind of play around and figure out what works best for you. To be honest, I leave everything at auto because it seems like the developer knows better than me which ones are working best. And so I've just been taking their word for it. And so far, they haven't let me down. So I'm leaving everything at auto and just allowing the developer to kind of determine which games are going to play best on which emulators. Now, Scraper works on this as well over the internet, so all you have to do is just like the other firmwares, you have to go in and put your screenscraper.fr login information, and then from there you just pick which systems you want to scrape, and then you just let it run, and it runs over the internet. And this will just go ahead and download all of your different box art and media and videos and things like that, which will then be installed onto your system. So one neat perk about this firmware is it allows you to use background music. So for example, I thought, well, it'd be cool to have like the Wii background music in my device while I'm navigating through games. So I went to this website and I found the original like Me channel music, which I always thought was kind of fun and catchy. So then I went and downloaded the MP3, and then I used FTP to access my system, and then I went over to this folder here, which is etc. Ark, Emulation Station, and then in here I needed to make my own folder, and I just called it Music. And inside that music folder, all you have to do at that point is just drag over that MP3. Okay, so once you've added the MP3 to your folder, then you can go back to the device, go under sound settings, and then it says front end music, and turn that on. And what it'll do is no matter how many MP3s you put in there, it'll randomly play them for you. So let me crank up the volume so you can hear it. So anyway, yeah, I think this is kind of a neat feature. You know, it's kind of soothing to have this nice background music. I ended up using like the Wii menu, the PS4 menu, all these different types of music to play in the background while I was navigating through my games, and I thought it was just a really cool feature. Now, my final favorite feature about this operating system is that it has a screensaver built in. So if you just leave it there for a minute, or if you press the select button, it'll start up a screensaver of just random videos from your different games that are on your device. And not only that, if you're going through and it's playing this like 30-second loop of all these different games, you can hit the start button and it'll start that game right then and there. And I don't know how many times I've actually used this, where I have it there and the screensaver's playing, and then I see a game randomly pop up and I see the video and I'm like, man, I want to play that game right now. And you just hit the start button and you can play the game right then. And it's one of my favorite things about this operating system. It's very small, it's very minute, but man, it brings me a lot of joy. Okay, well that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Really, I'm excited about this ArkOS operating system. I'm not sure if it's going to be my like #1 daily driver, or if I'm going to go back to 351 elect. Right now, I just have like various SD cards that I'm using and kind of going back and forth between the two. But I have to say, the fact that you can update your cores in RetroArch in this system, as well as update the system itself through the online update tool, to me is like a perfect combination, right? It allows you to basically update this thing without ever having to plug an SD card into your computer again, other than to add games. And to me, that's just perfect for this device. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think this is a good operating system? Do you prefer the others? Let me know. I'd be more than happy to have that discussion with you. Anyway, that's it for this video. We'll see you next time. Happy gaming.